Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. There we go. Okay, so, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. All right, so as Kevin said, my name is David Newman. Work for National Port Board. Had the, what's that? Oh, yeah, it works. There we go. Perfect. So just to kick things off today, I wanted to first say thanks for attending the session, and Courtney and I both are pretty excited about being able to join you today and talk about what's going on around demand, because certainly throughout the last year and a half, we've spent a lot of time talking with our producers and other industry stakeholders about where we've been, and then now, more importantly, about where we're going. And I think that that's really the focus of where we want to talk about today. And so over the last 36 months, you all know where we've been as an industry, some pretty challenging times. And I would say that you spoke and we listened as a staff and as the National Pork Board in your investment in the checkoff. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about some of the demand efforts we have going on, both from an international perspective, as Kevin mentioned, record exports. Courtney's going to touch on that with her international demand expertise, and then really going to pass that over to me to start introducing to you where we're going to go in 2025 with domestic consumption and demand. And so I was telling somebody in the back that certainly the demeanor and the feel of this year's Congress is a lot different than it was a year ago today whenever I spoke here. Certainly having a little wind at our back has been great through the fourth quarter. I would say that this is really a goal and an opportunity for us that I'm going to talk about this afternoon to see not where we're going to be going in the next 12 months, but potentially where we can go in the next 5 years and 10 years and a long-term strategy around demand. So I want to start this off to really say this thing about you spoke and we listened. Many of you have participated in producer surveys at the National Pork Forum last year in Chicago. There was obviously the delegates from the board of both MPB and NPPC that talked about what are the industry priorities need to be in 2024 and what do the industry priorities now need to be in 2025. And demand came to the top of that list in every one of the surveys. And certainly we have spent the last, especially I've been on staff now for about a year and a half at the National Pork Board, and literally have spent, I think, every day from the day that I walked in the door talking to people about demand and the wins and the opportunities that we have in front of us. And this pie chart really is directional in showing you the response to your investment and how seriously that was taken whenever the board of directors led by Al Wolfkohl here sitting in the front, as Kevin mentioned, how seriously the board of directors took that investment. So as you can see, domestic market development and international market development, that's the market growth team that I help lead here in Clive, is about 65% of the 2025 budget. So a significant investment and an investment in size and scale around marketing and market development that we haven't seen an investment in that scale in about 2 decades. So Bill even spoke at the annual meeting yesterday, and I think that he encapsulated it pretty well to say the industry priorities, they change. We've had times where animal welfare and trust and image and sustainability and the We Care metrics that we've talked about, where those were really top of mind, right? And talking about where the industry needs to go. And this budget reflects many of those things are still a significant priority. Foreign animal disease prevention, still a significant priority. Endemic disease has been infecting a lot of people here right now as we speak. So this doesn't take away the importance of the other areas around sustainability, We Care, and the investments that we make across other platforms, but it does demonstrate how critical it is to focus on the only thing we make, which is pork, right? Whether it's fresh or processed, at the end of the day, this is really about consumers around the world eating pork and repeating that process over and over again. And without that, none of this system works. So we're going to just jump right in. We have a lot of topics to cover. I'm going to hand this slide clicker over to Courtney to start off with international, move to domestic. What I would ask is we probably have more information than we could even think about getting through. So if there's a question and you want to know or you want to just do something, we can stop. Kevin's got a microphone. We can stop right then and we can ask the question and address it. We want this to be not us talking at you, but rather us talking with you and taking questions and really making sure that you understand directionally where we're investing your dollars and the direction that we're going. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone. We'll also make some time towards the end to leave for some open discussion. So good afternoon. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to you, Courtney.
Yeah. So first we're going to start with your international. About 30% of our product, as you hopefully are aware, goes overseas. And let's talk about that. It's more of an update. We've been making decades of investment in this space, and it has paid off. And it's not just being price takers, it's being price makers and creating value for our products, brand loyalty, and maximizing the carcass for you as producers. So I want to remind you, National Pork Board sets the strategy for our international efforts, but we work very differently than we do in the domestic space, and that's through partnerships, which I'll talk about, and it's something to celebrate the infrastructure of how we do business in the international world for U.S. pork and pork products. But our goal is to diversify our markets. We've done that really well over time. We don't want reliance on any one market. Think China or back in the day, Russia. We want to make sure as the world continues to be a crazy place, we can analyze things that are triggered, what the impact is, and that we have as many places to pivot to get the most value for every part of that pig each and every day for what we're sending overseas. But we're also seeking to differentiate U.S. pork versus domestic supplies in those markets and also other providers for exporters like Brazil and the European Union, the Chileans, the Canadians. And that's really our strategy. We also seek to increase market size in the developing world, which means we want them to eat more pork per capita, which means they have stronger demand, which means they're going to have more need for import, and that's business we can compete for. And then it's also, like I said, vying for market share because we've differentiated U.S. pork and created that brand loyalty. As I mentioned, carcass maximization, and that's the goal of market growth. Every part of that pig, what we can do is help to create demand for it, whether it stays here in the United States or goes abroad. We love having options, and it works for our business, and it's grown the value for that pig over time. At the end of the day, when we do work really closely, you'll see U.S. Meat Export Federation is our strategic partner. We were actually as an industry, one of the founding members. Decades ago, we became a net exporter in the mid-90s, and USMEF has the great capabilities and the boots on the ground across the world to be representing not only U.S. pork and pork products, but the other red meats of lamb and beef. So we have a collective great brand image for our products. MEF is executing that on an annual basis for us. And in their status as a cooperator with the Department of Agriculture, we're able to get matching trade promotion funds dollar for dollar. So your checkoff investment goes twice as far, supported by your Department of Agriculture. It truly is a public-private partnership and the successful backbone of American agriculture. It's truly an envy versus our competitors in Brazil that don't have the same infrastructure, for example. I want to emphasize that especially with such an interesting week that we've had, we coordinate super closely with the National Pork Producers Council. They are your voice in Washington, D.C. that works on trade policy, which correlates to market access. So I can't promote product where we don't have access, or we need to be aware where we might have some risk of either losing, trying to maintain, adding incremental market access, or obtaining brand new access. And they have their eye on the ball. They have a great team, but just know that we're talking all the time, again, so we can adjust our strategy as needed. And we're also working with their partners, the Meat Institute, which is the same type of organization, but for our packers and our exporters as well. So just know we have a full court press when it comes to the international space, but the National Pork Board, your staff, sets the strategy. Our board reinforces that exports are important to the profitability and the value of our industry. And so that's how we operate. But that's why when you read different articles, you're going to see all these organizations mentioned, because we can't do it alone. It takes all of us. Of course, we are going to set another record in exports this year, which is really exciting. These are 2023 numbers. We will have 2024 data in about a month, but I just want to emphasize, last year we were just over 8 billion. We're going to be closer to 8.5 this year, and we want to see value per unit over time going up, not just volume. This is not a sell it or smell it strategy. This is we want to be price creators and not just price takers. And we'll talk about that carcass maximization and what products are going to what markets in a minute, but it's just shy of 30% of our production. 25% of that is muscle cuts. That other 5% are the pork products, which are internal organs, variety meats, et cetera. And we do export to over 93 countries in a year. So market access is extremely important. Whether or not the opportunity is reachable today, that's how we can go and develop them and hopefully have the customer of the future, especially as some of our established markets like Japan are slowing down in their population growth. So we're always planning for the future and investing. When we look at the price, when we attribute every year via formula, it's about $64 is attributed to our ability to capture value from exports. So in other words, if we don't have export markets, we would have lower prices for pigs, equating to about $64. And that's clearly a result of being able to sell every part of that pig, which we traditionally wouldn't always eat here at home. Our biggest markets are focused mostly in the Western Hemisphere and Asia, but we are very much focused, especially this year, on developing Africa. When we talk about carcass maximization, what you're looking at in this chart is just clearly value. So if the percentage is what percentage of those primals that are exported in an annual basis, along with what markets they're going to. So especially when we look at the ham primal, about half of that goes overseas, a lot of that to Mexico. So being able to export that, it's a very big value to our industry because we wouldn't be able to very well consume that all at home. But I think the fun thing is the value we can actually acquire for our pork products, which are all those other parts, which actually we can capture much more value per unit or per pound than we can for even primals that we traditionally think of as our key go-tos. I can get a lot more for a pork bung than a pork loin in a lot of Asian markets. That means you can, and it's fascinating. So at the end of the day, we just want to reemphasize that trade, while it's completely complex, you have the right team in place, we have the right investment in place, we have the support of our government in place, and we have a great brand loyalty with our customers. We will have a record year. We this year became the #1 exporter in the world, overtaking the European Union, and that's something to celebrate. So with that, that's an update, decades of investment. Thank you for that. Thanks for allowing me to work for you. But let's talk about what's exciting for the 70% of product that we keep here in this country.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that something Courtney hit on there that's really important is, and something I say frequently is, for the last 25 or 30 years, we have been on this incredible exponential export journey. And it has always been, to some degree, our saving grace. Whenever right, at the end of the day, it's supply and demand. And it's about the consumers or the customers who are going to purchase the product. And now that we are at that approximately 30% when you take all into account level, that has been an incredibly important market for us. But like I said earlier, talking about this piece of saying, you spoke and we listened, the 70% we consume domestically has got to be a laser beam focus for us as well. We cannot rely on the rest of the world to suck up the supply. And to put that in perspective, doing the math, Lee, approximately, I look at the pounds of product, and you think about 8 billion exported abroad, and you think about that's 21 billion domestic. So you start thinking about those volumes and those numbers, and it becomes an incredibly important decision. And I've said this over and over again, but you cannot and you do not want to be in a position where this is just about pulling the price lever and making pork as cheap as possible so it will sell. I don't think that's a compliment to anybody in this room. And anytime I hear someone say that pork bungs could be worth more than pork loins, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. So, which is true, right? That's a whole nother discussion around innovation and product cuts that we can talk about later. But when I put in here in this slide, it's like the time is now. And I'm going to walk you through some of that. But I wanted to start with, because we're here at the Iowa Pork Congress to really talk a little bit about the state collaboration work we do, because you're going to hear me talk about something here in just a minute that is more brand-driven, national focus. But I want to also talk about the state collaboration that we have. And I will tell you that one of our strongest state partners is Iowa, and the work that we do with Pat and the team and Joyce in the back, right? The promotions committee in Iowa. It's a very close relationship we have. On Monday, Neil Hull, right, who leads our channel marketing team, was speaking to the promotions committee. And you're going to see a chart here in a minute that I'm going to show you. The reason I'm teeing this up that says, if you want to sell more pork in the United States, Iowa's not your focus, all right? And I want to point this out to you to say, don't be insulted by that, because there's more people between LA and Bakersfield than there is between Houston, Texas, and Fargo, right? So we got to think about fishing where the fish are. It's critical, but we still do programming every day with states, and a great example is the program that we've done here in Iowa, especially when you think about regional retailers, people who may not be national retailers, but they're very critical to the market. So right here in Iowa, two great examples, Hy-Vee, Fairway. So you think about those connections we can make internally, it still is about beating the drum individually in states. And the partnership we have with Iowa is a great example of that. By the way, I don't expect you to read that really small font, but this is an example of something that we did in Q4 2024. So I told you, we all know where we were going into the summer months last year. The markets were pretty suppressed, and everybody was saying, what are we going to do about markets now? How can we get into markets and really think about a strong short-term demand strategy that can help us drive both volume and value? And that's a really important thing, is this volume and value connection. That's us not trying to just sell it cheap. We're better than that. We can be above that. And so we did want to still say, hey, you know what, moving into the fall, we're going to have a lot of pigs. We're going to have a lot of pigs in Q4. We're going to have to help retailers and other folks understand how to clear the market. And we hit a full course press in Q4 in a partnership with Iowa Pork, where we went after the top retailers. You can see there on the bottom left-hand side, retailers like Walmart, Publix, Kroger, Albertsons, big players who can move big time volume to try to help clear the market in a time where we were financially depressed as an industry. And again, a very wordy slide. The thing you need to focus on is this 26.9 number. ROAS, by the way, stands for return on ad spend. So most of what we do today is not billboards going up and down the highway. It's not hand coupons. It is mostly digitally targeting individual consumers where they live, where they are, where they shop, when they're searching for recipes, when they're looking for meal ideas. That's a very strong and effective way today, using technology to really get into the marketplace in a strong way. And that's the Instacart thing you see on the bottom. We work very strongly with a lot of those digital partners that are out here in the world to reach consumers. And you know what I mean, because if you pick up your phone and, you know, how many of you use Facebook Marketplace? Raise your hand if you use Facebook Marketplace. The saving grace of Facebook, right? How come it is every time you open Facebook Marketplace, it's always the things you like that are at the top? Okay? That's not an accident. That is the power of digital working on your behalf, right? If you start talking to your neighbor about buying a lawnmower, you ever notice you start getting hit with ads about lawnmowers? And that is the exact type of strategy that we use, other proteins use. Quite honestly, that's marketing in the new modern era today. And so when we do that and we go out there and implement it, we're trying to drive big volume with, right, the limited amount of dollars that we had. And Q4 was a huge success on demand. And retailers were promoting pork like never before. We now have a little bit of tailwind at our back. You saw that in the marketplace. I mean, the cutout going over $100 twice in Q4 was pretty astronomical for me, third generation, being in the pig business my entire life. I've never seen such a strong fourth quarter. And so the idea here is that we want to keep doing these large-scale, long-term demand projects. But we can't forget the short-term activations that we do with states. So Joyce and your team especially, thank you, because those are huge partnerships, and thank you to the Iowa producers for investing in that, because while we're doing this larger brand campaign, we don't want to forget about hitting a lot of activations all over the country. But I'm going to move into a little different conversation now, and what I often like to talk about is saying, what is the role that the National Pork Board can play, and what is the role that the National Pork Board cannot play? And there are quite literally legal aspects of this, because we are under the direction of the Act and Order, right? The mandatory checkoff system. So there's some things we can't do. We cannot impact supply. We couldn't if we wanted to anyways, and you know, I've been in this business my entire life, and if I had $1 for every time I heard a joke about we should add more sows, we should add more pigs, I would have a lot of dollars. So we don't change that number. But the one number we can do is we can impact demand. And quite literally, it's our charge. In the Act and Order, which turns 40 years old this year, right? The Act and Order was passed in 1985. So here we are 40 years later. The first line in the Act and Order says the Pork Promotion, Research and Education Act of 1985. So this is quite literally our legal mandate to try to help impact demand. Does it mean that we can solve all demand? No, it does not mean that we can do that. But it does mean that we can try to build support with industry partners like packers and retailers and food service companies to try to drive more demand in the marketplace, and most importantly, increase the relevance of pork. And so it's been a journey along the way. The other white meat is, right, foundationally one of the most popular marketing campaigns that was ever launched in this country. Not just in the pork business. I mean, it is wildly successful. It was wildly successful as a recognition campaign. But all of you know that we still eat the same amount of pork that we ate in 1985. Now, the other white meat actually wasn't launched until 1987, 2 years after the Act and Order. And I would say that there's a really great story to tell about consumption, to say it hasn't gone down, thank God. But there's another strong story to say it's time for something new, and that's a repositioning. And so when we walked away from the other white meat, right, that ran from the 1980s, as it says in the bottom, all the way into the 2000s, we then launched another marketing brand campaign, Pork Be Inspired. How many of you remember Pork Be Inspired? Okay, right. So Pork Be Inspired was a campaign that was really about heavy pork users. And it was also very focused on, at the time, who the demographic of the population was that really ate a lot of pork. And candidly, that was mostly the baby boomer generation, right? Which has drastically changed since that launched through 2011 and 2017. The baby boomer generation is now eating less meat, significantly less meat than the younger generations when we start thinking about Gen X and we start thinking about Gen Zs and millennials, right? This will all come together here in just a minute. And then in 2018, so we ran our course with Be Inspired. Then we moved into the late, I say 2018 BC, that's before COVID, okay? Where we were actually talking very strongly about a B2B approach. And so Bill Even came into the organization, our boss, as CEO of the organization, and if you remember, it was the speed of business, Gene, right? That's what it was. It was about how do we make these partnerships sit at the table with retailers, sit at the table with food service companies, ask them what they need from us, how we can build a stronger case. And to be honest with you, if it wasn't for those relationships today, I wouldn't be standing here, and we definitely wouldn't be talking about launching a new brand campaign, because we don't have the thrust nor the dollars to think about handling demand for an entire country. It does take supportive partnerships with those people. So this B2B approach was part of the marathon, and it was very strong. We recognized at that time one of the very, very strong areas we could focus on was multicultural. So when we're talking about that audience, we're talking about the Hispanic audience, the African American audience, the Asian audience in this country, which is why I say over and over again is where the biggest opportunity may lie in the protein space for pork. because all of those categories are the future growth of this country and its population over the next 20 years. But the data says over 85% of the population growth in this country is going to come from that audience. And so when you think about that, it's very, very culturally relevant. Pork in their dishes, right? Beyond the borders of this country, while pork, unfortunately, is not the #1 global meat anymore, okay, it's actually poultry. Pork is a very close second. And you know, any of you who've had the experience to travel throughout the world, Europe, Asia, pork is king. And it is huge. And you think about some of those key markets that Courtney talked about earlier, how crucial they are, it's very important. I mean, I would love to think that we could get someday to the consumption level of Korea. 76 pounds per person per year. That's a lot of pork. That's a lot of pork bung, right? So it's just a lot of product. And so as we thought about the multicultural push, it's also been a great return on investment of checkoff dollars. But it was a bit of a one-off approach that we still do, focused very specifically on one individual target. And then we moved into the pandemic. And then we moved into activist groups. And we started talking more about the We Care, Trust and Image side of the business, which was very, very important. Certainly, all of us remember those times. And then it rolled into the human nutrition stage. So the board of directors made a significant investment in human nutrition, realizing that the protein sector is probably a little bit behind when it comes to building research. If you want to impact my plate and you want to impact the dietary guidelines in DC, you've got to have strong factual research to back up your statements. And so many of you have probably had the opportunity to meet Dr. Kristen Hicks-Ruth, who works on our team. She's amazing. She's a human nutrition researcher who is building a strong case for human nutrition. So that work continues. In 2022, we started talking about this B2B strategy and how important certain items are. How many of you have talked about ground pork? Everybody in this room, right? Why can't we get more people to eat ground pork? Ground pork is on fire right now because of the work that has been done over the last few years throughout the industry. Ground pork is up for a second year, double digits. You're starting to see more offerings in retail, different fat to lean ratios that are selling very well. We have examples right here in Iowa where a lot of that research actually started with a retailer here in Iowa that actually kind of set the groundwork for, no pun intended, for setting it up for ground pork. And so COVID-19 exacerbated that, which I often say we all think about COVID-19 as being a big negative, but I say anytime you can teach 8 billion people how to cook at home again, that's not a bad thing. And so people got bored of the same old ingredients and they started trying new things, and we took advantage of that. That's a good example of how we took advantage of innovation. And now lead up to 2023 in this build-up I've got here for the playbooks for channels. So when we talk about channels, we really honed in on this B2B strategy, B2B, business-to-business strategy, where we could actually talk about what's mattering out in the industry. How do we build a playbook that we can take the multicultural strategy we have at the Pork Board as an example, put that in the hands of a marketing team at a major packer processor, just as an example, that they can replicate that playbook and create a bit of a halo effect, right? Learn from us. Because again, what is the role of the Pork Board and what is the things that we cannot do? We don't own a pig and we don't own a pound of product. So there's just some things that we are inherently not going to be able to do. Product, information is our product. We say this quite often. We are a catalyst of information, and we have a really strong team working on your behalf to work throughout the business to build a B2B strategy which each one of these major players. So we're almost here to 2024, 2025. So when I came on staff and Bill charged me with leading the market growth team, and really it all boiled down to one thing. Let's quit doing all of these things internally in silos, and let's think about how we're really going to pool it all together to integrate it into one major approach. And that was some very strategic direction from our board. I remember Bob Ruth, our former president, he said, we want to see something bold. And Bill said, bold, not reckless, right? Bold, not reckless. And that is the approach that we're taking now, where we have this consumer marketing campaign where we can get a full integration of all the things I just talked about. So whether it is the consumer work, our packer processor and B2B folks, the food service opportunities we potentially have in innovation in other areas, what we do with retailers, and roll this into something bigger around demand. So here we are in 2025, and what we're going to do next. And what we're going to do is we're going to do something we haven't done since Pork Be Inspired. And if you notice, I intentionally left one campaign out. Does anybody know what that is? I don't have a prize for you. Yeah, okay, yeah. My least favorite, but I'm just going to say that, right? Since then, right, where we're going now is to launch a new consumer-facing brand campaign that is domestic. So we're going back to marketing in a big way. And I do say this, I mean, as the rally cry that I think we can all get behind is, this is a transformational time. Well, luckily, we have some tailwind right now, as I mentioned, in the markets, but we know where that has taken us back down the other path before. We could turn this thing around one way or another in the next 3 to 5 years, depending on the supply and demand equation that is out there. So without just relying on what's happening in the export market, do we have an opportunity to really reinvent pork and think about its relevance, think about its role with consumers in the marketplace? And I put this example in there because I think it's a very important example. This little bitty company called Netflix back in 2000, who we really call disruptive innovators. People who were looking at the business differently. They were seeing it from a totally different lens than this mega company that was Blockbuster. In 2000, Netflix went to Blockbuster and said, hey, will you buy us for $50 million? And Blockbuster in 2000, I was just reading this, in 2000, Blockbuster brought in $800 million in late fees. I remember those, right? If you're Gen Z, you're wondering what Blockbuster is, okay? But when you think about that disruptive innovation Netflix brought to the business, it eventually pushed them out. And so what I would say is, which one do we want to be? I would much rather be a disruptive innovator and think about how we could change this business than continue to think down a more linear thought process that could eventually, potentially, put us in the position of Blockbuster. Because last year when I was standing here, and I put all the data out for those of you who listen, or if you've listened to us speak in the last year, and I don't have any of those old slides. It was talking about, here's the future, right? Here's the future of pork. And it was a pretty negative message. It was, if you look at the long-term trajectory of pork consumption, it's declining across generations significantly. Gen Zs eat a fraction of pork compared to baby boomers. Gen X eats a fraction of pork in comparison to baby boomers as well. So the long-term forecast for pork consumption, and especially when you think about fresh pork consumption, is it's not good. And this is about how do we move forward now in this more of a Netflix mentality. And it's really about the consumer. So this is a very top-down approach to the marketplace. And when we think about who that future consumer is, they are diverse and they are definitely in charge. And they have options. I would say they have more options than any consumer that has ever lived on this planet today. They don't have to choose pork, right? There are other animal proteins. There are other plant proteins. There are numerous other things happening in the area of human nutrition. Just look at what's happening with GLP-1s, right? Look at the data there. 1 in 8 Americans is on GLP-1s. That's a staggering number. What does that mean for protein moving forward, right? What does that mean for animal protein moving forward? Those type of things. So when we think about the consumer, what's important, and I mentioned to you that I was going to put this map up, is if you just look at that data, 80% of the population and 80% of the consumption is consolidated to just the states that are in orange and blue. No surprise, California, Texas, Florida, New York, that's 1/3 of all consumption in this country. So when we go out with this large-scale brand marketing campaign, This is a targeted approach. In the past, we've taken more of what I would call a shotgun approach to the market, where we've tried to be all things to all people and go from a national perspective. This is about taking the limited amount of dollars that we have and very strategically placing them where we can actually make a big difference to drive both volume and value in the marketplace. So if you've been to our booth upstairs, shameless plug, if you haven't been there, or if you were at World Pork Expo this last year, or if you've listened to any of the communications coming out of the National Pork Board to you, the industry stakeholders, you've probably heard something about our Consumer Connect work, or also known as our consumer segmentation. And that work laddered up to building out this program. And what I mean by that is, in 2023, in early 2024, we built out a very, very strong data and insights engine at the National Pork Board. So Kirsten Hafer, who leads that effort for us now, many of you have probably seen her before, they led this very robust segmentation project saying, long before we go to market, we got to know who we're targeting. Before we just go throwing something out there, we need to understand who the future consumer really is and what they look like and what matters to them and what we need to think about in terms of a marketing perspective to drive relevance back into the marketplace. And it boiled down to these very specific 7 segments. So if by chance you have taken this before, I personally am a culinary adventurer. I thought for sure that I was just a confident meat eater. But you know who you are if you're a culinary adventurer because you've got like 3 smokers on your deck, right? And you think somewhere you're going to be famous on Instagram, and you're not, like me. But you still take pictures of all your food and send it to everybody. That describes the culinary adventurer, right? We have people who are also these mindful choice makers in the top right-hand side. That's a significant portion of the United States population, people who are not culinary adventurers, and they're very concerned about what they're feeding their family. Not only themselves, but their kids. So labeling matters to them. Understanding what nutrition means for their family, the role it plays in a diet matters to them. Those groups are very, very important for us to focus on when we think about this digital marketing effort that we're going to deploy here in 2025. And you'll notice the 3 stars by 3 of the very specific segments. This is another way for us to drill down with your dollars to really say, how can we focus on the groups that matter the most? When we launch this campaign here in early 2025, this campaign is going to be very specifically focused on those 3 segments that have the stars next to them. Again, this is an attempt to be all things to all people, and I assure you that we have no intention or desire of trying to promote pork to the meat minimizers. Right? It tells us not only where we need to focus, but it tells us where we don't need to focus, most importantly. So there are just some audiences where we may not actually hit them with an ad about purchasing pork or recipes or pork's flavor or a variety of other things. But we might want to know who they are to hit them with messages about sustainability or we care or welfare or some upcoming issue or H5N1, you know, things that I'm looking at Sally Kruger here in the back whenever I say that, and no one likes to say that acronym, but there are things that matter to consumers beyond just marketing and selling them pork, but in our opinion and what we're doing right now with this is about driving sales. This is about driving profitability for producers, most importantly. So what is different about our new brand campaign? And by the way, if you think we're going to unveil it today, we're not. I'm sorry. We're not going to. It's coming, okay? I can't tell you the tagline, but I can tell you a lot of what it's about. And I can tell you also what is different. So when I say what is different, I mean what is different about the upcoming brand campaign versus the campaign that was The Other White Meat, then was Don't Be Blah, that was Pork Be Inspired. First off, and most importantly, the reason I say a rally cry is we need to be unapologetic about pork because we're not the other anything. And I love that line. You know, we're not the other anything. That was a different time. That was a different era, and it doesn't work today. We've got to find a bold position for pork that is very uniquely positioned as a protein source. So I think it's very critical that we take this unapologetic position for the products that we produce. And it's got to be bigger than just fresh. So the previous campaigns were all about fresh pork, okay? And you'd say, why do we have such an emphasis on fresh pork when bacon is so awesome? If the whole world was about marketing bacon, this would be a different story. But 77% of all pork sales are fresh at retail. So the reason why we have to think about that is it's most of what's in front of consumers, right? Then we have to rely on them to take it home and actually cook it right, to have an enjoyable eating experience. So we've got to think about this as not only a fresh strategy, but we've got to think about the process strategy as well. So that includes, when I say processed, we're thinking about ham and sausage and bacon, which, by the way, a lot of consumers don't even know that bacon is pork. If you look at Glenn Tonzer from K-State, runs the Meat Demand Monitor, he will tell you that there is a percentage of people, almost 20% of people, who are vegetarian that eat bacon because they don't know. They haven't been told what the product is. It's time to celebrate the whole category, right? Can you imagine pizza without pepperoni, pizza without sausage? There is big opportunity to celebrate pork and the position we already have. So when we think about something else, it's about data. This isn't just our team sitting in a room coming up with slogans to put out to the rest of the world. This is very data-driven, based on the segmentation data that we put out there, based on the analytics that we have at the National Pork Board with our data and research engine to really drive good decision-making. So this is a very data-driven business. We're going to use those metrics to drive it, and we're going to work with the entire business to really understand how we can get support. And I'll give you an example of that is to Al and the rest of the team at the Pork Board, whenever we started this, we said, we won't do this in a vacuum. We will create an advisory group. We have an advisory group. It's called the Marketing Advisory Group. And it's really a sampling of CMOs, so chief marketing officers from major packer processors throughout the country, state associations, and their marketing leads. Joyce is on that here from Iowa. It's a sampling of producers throughout the business to say, we're level checking with this advisory group throughout the entire process to make sure that we have support. Because again, that halo effect is important. The board is investing about $17 million in 2025 towards this new brand campaign. That's a significant investment of checkoff dollars. But we want that 17 to become 27 and 37 and 47 and 57 million dollars by getting that halo effect and that work that we can do with packer processors and retailers to really think about the brand position. And I'll give you an example of that. It has happened before. Everybody and their brother used the other white meat. So much so that it's still out there. We haven't effectively pushed it in years, and you still see it. You know, some of you are thinking, like, I still have some other white meat gear, or I still have an apron that says the other white meat. And more often than not, when somebody says, what do you do? I said, I work for the National Pork Board. And they go, oh, the other white meat, right? And I'm like, no, actually, that's not it, but thanks. Right, because I didn't have anything else to give them. That's the point. I didn't have another strategy to give them. Yes, sir.
Well, you mentioned being very involved in industry. Are you also talking to the consumers or just looking at the data for consumers?
Absolutely. Yeah, talking to consumers. So as part of the process of segmentation, there are thousands of people in that segmentation pool. So all the segmentation data is built based on talking to consumers and what consumers prefer. Okay, and this slide just says, does marketing work? Yes, it does. This is actually the return on investment from Pork Be Inspired back in 2016. So the Pork Board requires a return on investment report, by the way, every 5 years that's ran by Dr. Harry Kaiser at Cornell. And back whenever they analyzed the Be Inspired campaign, for every $1 invested in the checkoff, it returned $14 in producer profitability. So being in market, if you want to sell something, you got to promote it, right? And you really got to think about it. And so we want to think about it, but also, and I'm going to skip over this, we also have to measure it. That is one of the big challenges put in front of us by the board as well. Is yes, we understand we need a brand campaign, but here's the question. How do you measure success? So we are working with a team of economists and our ad agency that we have hired, Barkley OKRP out of Kansas City, Missouri. a well-known, nationally recognized agency, to talk about how we build something. We're calling it the Pork Power Index, right? I like it because it sounds cool, but it also takes into account not only the attitudinal measures of marketing. That attitudinal is what are the behaviors, what is the perception, what is the consumer's affinity. We have to not only do something that looks good. I'm describing the other white meat. We have to actually get metrics to say, is there value that's being driven back to producers? So things like the cutout value, things like real per capita expenditure. How can we measure success from where we are today to where we can go in the future? So we're building this PPI index in partnership with another advisory group. Some of those individuals are here in the room today, and we're really thinking that this can't just be something that is flashy, something we put out there, but it's also got to be something we can measure so we can fine-tune it. Because the consumer is ever changing. And the consumer and the focus of this is really about mostly the Gen Z and millennial audiences. And so it takes risk, right? I'm down to nearly my last slides here, just so you know. So when you think about brands and branding, successful brands do require risk. And we're going to be launching this brand campaign at the National Pork Industry Forum in Atlanta in March. There's going to be a bit of a soft launch there. The first time that you as producers and producer delegates will see what the tagline is and what the structure is behind it. And then we will have a full-blown media launch in May prior to grilling season. We want to be in market prior to grilling season so we can start hitting the ground running here. And this has been a very long process, and you've got a lot of people who are working really hard to speed up something that would normally take years, and we're packing it into about a 1.5-year time frame to get this launch out. So while we see that they take risk, the other thing about that is that, and I'm going to move to this slide here for the sake of time, Kevin, but while it was taken with risk, I want to reassure you that that piece that Bill even said is bold, not reckless, is really important to us. And so one of the things that we said, this is different this time versus what we've done in the past, is we didn't rely on the agency to build the brand architecture and bring it to us as a staff. Rather, we built the brand architecture. Nobody knows the pork business better than we do. We worked in tandem with industry partners to build out the brand architectures, what you see in front of you, to talk about what are the non-negotiables when it comes to pork. And we'll tell you right now, the taglines that we are testing are in the consumer testing phase. So we test tagline, we test creative. What do the consumers like when we think about Gen Zs and millennials? So what is going to resonate with them the best? And then we introduce that line. But one thing that we know is there's 2 non-negotiables as a teaser here that we know from the consumer data. One of those is that when we think about what drives pork in the category, it's flavor. The segmentation said that as well. Taste and flavor is the #1 attribute that consumers look for. Balance and nutrition is second, and convenience is third. So taste and flavor and pork's versatility are very, very important in what we roll out. Helping people understand, right? Gen Zs, somebody said this earlier today, they don't think about pork as center of the plate. They don't think about an Iowa chop with mashed potatoes on one side and green beans on the other. Listen to your kids or your grandkids or anybody else and listen to them and talk about food. What do you want to eat? Italian, Mexican, Asian, right? An ingredient. I want to go eat ramen that has pork belly in it. I want carnitas that has shredded pork in it. I want Italian meatballs. I want something. They're not saying, I'd really like to have a pork chop tonight. Now, sir, there are certainly people who still do that, but it's understanding what drives them to the business that's important, but we can't forget those non-negotiables that drives pork. And this is where I finish, is just to say, people say all the time, well, that's a bold plan. And I go, what's the cost of doing nothing? And the risk of doing nothing is that we find ourselves back where we were in 2022 and 2023. And when you think about that, you think about the economics of this business, we're trying to ask young people to enter the business. We're trying to think about labor. We're trying to think about all these different factors. It's hard to drive people into a business that doesn't make money. So the most important thing for me, right, coming from a production background, my parents were hog farmers their whole life. That's all they have ever done as a career, is saying we should celebrate the only thing we make, right, unapologetically, But we've got to go out and promote it in a big, big way if we want to think about driving people into the business for the next 40 years, right? So I'll say we'll leave it open for questions, Kevin. We're still on time, so I just
David
want
and
to leave it
Courtney-
right there.
David and Courtney, I feel like I have a great big pipe that you've filled me full of information, data, and all these resources that are building up back pressure behind this valve that's on the end of the pipe. And you're exciting me, and as producers keep asking questions, there's a Bunsen burner underneath this pipe continuing to build pressure in this pipe. And in March, you're going to crack this valve just a little bit, and I think just a really exciting thing's going to spew out in front of it.
Yeah, I hope so. I feel like I'm inside that vessel.
Yeah, you